It's no secret the Boston public school system is struggling. It narrowly avoided a state takeover earlier this year after the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education found it failed to meet a slew of improvement goals set after the last state probe into the system. In a scathing report, the department described a system that has, quote, failed to effectively serve its most vulnerable students, carry out basic operational functions, address systemic barriers to providing an equitable, quality education. That's despite a lottery-like enrollment process that factors in which schools students would like to attend. It was implemented back in 2014 in an effort to give people across the city, quote, access to quality schools closer to home. But over the years, studies have shown the lottery system has missed the mark, with black and low-income families often placed at a disadvantage. It's no wonder black student enrollment has plummeted, according to new data published by the Boston Globe, dropping by nearly half in just the last 2 decades, while the black student population has surged at local charter schools. And to many families which feel failed by the system, it's not just a matter of competence, but intention. As one local black mother and education advocate told the Globe, to me it speaks to will. You can do great things, Boston, build a new neighborhood in the Seaport, bury a highway to create the Greenway, but when it comes to BPS, you choose not to. I'm joined now by Latoya Gayle. She's founder and former executive director of Boston School Finder. It's a website that helps families choose between all kinds of Boston schools, or at least attempt to. She's also the mother of 4 kids, some of whom have been in the Boston public school system. I'm also joined by Jay Blitzman, retired Massachusetts juvenile court justice, now interim executive director of Mass Advocates for Children Judge. And Latoya Gayle, I really appreciate your being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Latoya Gayle, if I can start with you, my understanding is you had 2 kids who went to Boston public schools, moved to charter schools. You have a 3rd in the school system now. You say when that student moves further in the system, you're likely to take that student out. You might not even enroll your 1-year-old. Why?
Right. Well, like I said, my oldest is a sophomore in college. And so I don't see much change, if any, between what my 2nd grader is experiencing versus what my child who's completed, K through 12 is experiencing. And, I know people say things like, change takes time, but whose time? Like my kids don't have that time and I don't have that time. So I'm not going to waste it.
You said to one of my coworkers in advance coming on that you had good feelings about the teachers in the school.
Absolutely.
So if it's not the teachers, where's the hole in the system that needs filling?
Here's the thing. It's a system that is under-resourced. And I know people say this all the time, but it's like, I can know how to do lots of things, but I can't do all those things simultaneously. I can know how to work with the child with special needs. I have a child who's on the autism spectrum. I understand that. I can know how to do that, but I can't serve, that child and 10 other kids who also are coming into this classroom with a host of needs that can't be met by, it's under-resourced from like money, but also people. We need people.
Yeah, and by the way, just if people think Latoya Gayle is an outlier, Mass Inc. and the Shaw Family Foundation did a poll of Boston black parents at the end of the summer where they'd send their kids if they had a choice. Here's the results. A significant majority, 36% charter, 25% private, meaning 61% not public schools, only 34% public schools. Judge, you've spent virtually your whole career in and out of the judiciary working on issues affecting juveniles. Is it the fact that we've had 9 superintendents over 2 decades? What has caused the inability to solve these problems that everybody says they're focused on?
Well, I think 9 superintendents does speak to a certain degree of instability, to understate the issue. But I think the problem is much more systemic. And I think the reality is that Boston students, mostly students of color, attend schools in highly segregated neighborhoods. And as Richard Rothstein in The Color of Law and so many other commentators have observed, our schools are now more segregated than they were at the time of Brown versus Board of Education. How could that be? So this is systemic. And it's not just a question of more resources. It's a question of how we allocate limited resources.
Give me
And
an
we don't do
example of,
that.
an allocation that you consider to be unwise or inappropriate.
Well, uh, when I think of allocation of resources, I always think of the Boston Public Health Study from 2016, Boston University, which showed that the average lifespan of people living in Roxbury is 59 years of age, as juxtaposed by an average lifespan of people living in Back Bay of 92. Now, that study's been critiqued as somewhat hyperbolic. Maybe the difference is not that dramatic, but it's still obscene by any parameter. So that's a real, that's a reality. And the reality is that our schools are dramatically under-resourced. So this requires fixes which include looking at zoning, creating more affordable housing to hopefully keep middle-class people in the city, because that's part of the big problem here. We had white flight after busing, and then we had a second wave due to unaffordable housing stock. And then we had schools which were essentially attended by Black and brown students. And at the same time, as you noted, we have wealthy white people moving into the seaport. So it's a question of having the political will to allocate the resources in a way which makes sense. So that really involves looking at systemic issues which transcend just the school system.
Understood.
We have to look at housing policy.
Understood.
We have to look at housing policy. Marian Wright Edelman has observed, as you probably know, right, that the cradle to prison pipeline runs through underfunded, under-resourced neighborhoods and schools. This is not a revelation.
So,
right?
Latoya Gayle, what are the one or two things that you would do if you were the new superintendent to right this injustice? What would you do?
I would have some goals. I don't think, because we've had so much leadership, there's not even like, here are our basic goals that we're going to meet. Like, every kid is going to be able to read. And we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that happens. For instance, I know so many families who have a child who's dyslexic. And that sets a trajectory for their education. That's not the same in wealthier communities. If a child's dyslexic, they get what they need and they go on to be successful and have all the opportunities that in life. But if you're a poor child, that's not the same. You're just like, you're failed from the beginning.
Well, let me stay with you for 1 second.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
That quote that I read from the Boston Globe from a fellow Black parent and education advocate about intentionality is pretty harsh. But do you think it's intentional, that there is a feeling that Black and brown kids are second-class citizens and deserve second-class education? Do you believe that?
I'm going to go with what the judge said. We all live in systems, right? And if we're not intentional about breaking a system, then the system goes on and does what it does. And we know that poor people, we know that Black families, Black children are disproportionately negatively impacted by all of our systems, incling education.
Including special education, as we learned a few weeks ago. Judge, can you in the last minute, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say that the recent reporting regarding the busing situation in Boston just underlines the scope of this problem. Jakira Rogers, who was the Racial Equity Action Program Director at MAC, helped highlight this issue. Black and brown kids, the bus doesn't come.
Absolutely right.
It's bad enough that you can't go to a quality school in your own neighborhood, that you've got to go through the lottery system that you described, and then go through this diaspora of busing that could entail a 3-hour bus rides back and forth. And then the bus doesn't come. And really sadly, there are anecdotal reports because of this disconnect between what happens with the busing and then later in school, parents being called, why isn't your child in school? An allegation perhaps of being neglectful. That can and should be and must be fixed yesterday.
Judge Blitzman, Latoya Gayle, I'm sorry I'm out of time tonight, but I hope you'll rejoin me to continue this important conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you both.